Welcome, and thank you for joining me for this pre-concert talk about True Concord's upcoming concerts, The Tucson Spirit, The Love of Flight. I'm Eric Holtan, founding music director of True Concord Voices and Orchestra, and I'm delighted to share a few thoughts with you about these upcoming performances, this all-American program. And we're going to focus on the three key pieces of the program: Copeland's Lincoln Portrait, Thompson's The Testament of Freedom, and I'm looking forward to being joined by our assistant director, Phil Moody, who will be conducting that piece in just a few minutes. And then Mark Blitzstein's Airborne Symphony. We're giving a world premiere of this piece from the 1940s in a brand new iteration. It's a suite edition, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. All of this program, all of this music is part of our ongoing season celebration of Tucson's 250th birth year. Actually, this year, 2025, later this year, marks Tucson's official 250th, and we've been celebrating all year. What's also remarkable about 2025 is that it marks the 100th anniversary of the founding of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. So lots to celebrate, all while we're looking forward to, in just a year or so, the big celebration of America's 250th as we look back to 1776 and the Declaration of Independence. So it seems fitting that we start with the Copeland. Everybody knows this piece. It's a famous work of Copeland in which he sets text by Abraham Lincoln. The piece starts with the words, "We cannot escape history." And many of these texts that are narrated throughout the piece are by Lincoln himself, although Copeland inserted himself a little bit when he says things like, Lincoln was a quiet man. Lincoln was a quiet and melancholy man. But when he spoke of democracy, this is what he said. It's a majestic piece, just brimming with patriotism and just the gravity of the words of Lincoln. And in fact, we get some of the most famous words from the Gettysburg Address, in which Lincoln talks about government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. It's a dramatic moment in this piece that opens this concert, this all-American program. This piece, you've probably heard it many times in your life, and you've heard of some of the more famous narrators like Walter Cronkite or Barack Obama, even Katharine Hepburn, and so many others who have narrated this work. We're delighted that James Reel, right here in Tucson, AZPM's classical music director and weekday morning announcer, will be our will be our narrator for Copeland's Lincoln Portrait. We're going to jump to the Blitzstein, the Airborne Symphony, and I imagine that unlike Copeland, this is a name that may be not as familiar to you. He is mostly known for his 1937 musical, The Cradle Will Rock, and his adaptation of Kurt Weill's Three Penny Opera. He served in the Air Force in World War II as an entertainment specialist. He wrote music for informational wartime films. He gave concerts and organized radio programs for American troops. And while he was overseas serving, he conceived of his Airborne Symphony, imagining a large-scale work scored for full orchestra and men's chorus and soloists. He imagined performances all over Europe, and naturally war got in the way, and there were no performances in Europe. But when he returned to America in 1945, he found a champion of Airborne Symphony in none other than Leonard Bernstein. It's an interesting story, too, as he came back to the United States. He thought he'd grabbed all of his score and part materials, but as it turned out, he'd only grabbed some of the parts and had left the score back in Europe. He tried to locate the score and was unable to, and so he reconstructed the piece from memory, a remarkable feat, because this is a large work of 50 or 60 minutes. As it turns out, the original score was found, but he preferred his new edition that he had created after he had returned to the United States. And when he played a portion of it for Bernstein, Bernstein was immediately intrigued by it. And Bernstein premiered it in 1946 and recorded it that same year with the New York City Orchestra. And like the Copland, the Blitzstein has narration throughout the piece. And he asked none other than Robert Shaw, the famed conductor, to be the narrator. Shaw would, of course, have prepared the chorus, the men's chorus, for the recording, but Bernstein asked Shaw to also be the narrator. Interestingly, that Bernstein recorded it not once, but twice. That first time was in 1946 with Robert Shaw. He did it 20 years later in 1966 with Orson Welles as the narrator, and this time with the New York Philharmonic. I am pleased that our narrator will be Bruce Chamberlain, my mentor and professor emeritus and former director of choral activities at the University of Arizona, to whom I owe a great deal of my success. He trained me very well, particularly in the arena of the big choral orchestral masterworks, of which this is definitely one. Bruce was also the founding director of the Tucson Symphony Orchestra Chorus. And it seemed to me that in the spirit of Bernstein asking Shaw to be the narrator for that first recording of the Blitzstein, not that I'm comparing myself to Bernstein or Bruce to Robert Shaw, but I thought it would be really cool to ask Bruce to be the narrator of what will be the world premiere of a new suite version of Blitzstein's Airborne Symphony. The work is controlled by the Kurt Weill Foundation, and we've been working closely with the foundation to create this new, shorter, and more narrowly focused version of the work. As I mentioned, the work was about an hour in length. This new edition is about 25 minutes. It eschews many of the references to war and combat and the enemies of the war, and it focuses primarily on the miracle of flight and man's fascination with flying in general. So we are delighted that Tucson and Green Valley will hear the first performances of this new suite edition of Blitzstein's Airborne Symphony. As I said, it celebrates the miracle of flight and our fascination with flying by going back and tracing throughout history man's fascination, whether it's Etna's flying on the back of an eagle in Mesopotamia. It references Icarus flying close to the sun, and in modern history here, Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine, to contemporary aviators, including the Wright brothers. It's a clever and upbeat aria for a tenor soloist at the beginning of this work, as he's tracing the history of man's fascination with flight. Later on, another highlight of the work, we get this wonderfully tender Ballad of the Bombardier, a baritone aria in which a young 19-year-old airman he's writing a letter to his beloved Emily back home, and he's expressing how difficult it is to express how much Emily means to him. It's a wonderful piece as part of overall this uplifting, inspiring, and at times touching work that was championed by Bernstein, and that we are pleased to present in this newest form to celebrate Davis Monthan's 100th anniversary, to honor our service men and women who have served on our behalf, all part of this celebration of Tucson and its 250th birthday upcoming. And as we look, of course, to the upcoming 250th anniversary of 1776. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by True Concord's assistant director, Phil Moody. Hey, Phil, how you doing?
I'm well, Eric. Just enjoying a little cold and snow up at my parents' house in Springfield, Missouri. So, looking forward to Tucson and some warm weather very soon.
Well, I wondered what that white stuff was in the background. Is that
Right.
actual snow back there?
Yes, we've had few snowstorms this week, and then the weekend is going to get a little warmer, hopefully. But then next week, kind of snow almost every day. So, and I'm here through next Friday, and then just a quick, weekend in Atlanta to see some friends before True Concord. So it's going to be 10 degrees and 5 degrees and then up to hopefully 60s maybe or 70s in Tucson in a week and a half, I hope.
It's been pretty lovely here, and we'll look forward to having you back as usual. So you're typically based in Atlanta, correct?
Yep, that's me.
Okay, cool. So Phil, just for I mean, our audience has seen you, many times, but how long have you been singing with True Concord now?
Well, it was Lessons and Carols December of 2010.
Holy,
Um,
it's
yep,
2010,
yep.
15 years. We ought to
Yeah.
give you a medal or a diploma or I don't know, a toaster or something.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, so that was when I was doing my doctorate at University of Arizona. And I mean, from what I remember with that one, I was kind of a last minute fill in. Of course, at that time, University of Arizona and Arizona Choir, our schedules were pretty crazy, so it wasn't like we could do a lot with you. But the December worked out with finals being done, and I think I kind of came in as a last minute replacement, and that was my second year at the university. So then after that, the third year, I think there was one, maybe two, but again, rehearsing wise. And then after that, ended up in Georgia to teach at University of Georgia. So that was what took me to the South, as it were.
Nice.
Had 2 years of teaching full time. So that was one of those years was our Stephen Paulus recording, that original recording at May.
Right.
Um, so I still could come back for like a Christmas and then something in May, but the schedule, it was once or twice. And then 2014, 15, that season then was when I was kind of back full time in the Corps and doing everything. Yeah. And then I guess the assistant director, that was the year before COVID. So that 1920 season was the official first year as the assistant director. So
Wow, what a year to kick off your tenure as assistant director before all of that COVID chaos. But it's been great having you in this role. And, obviously our audiences know that from time to time you're conducting the group, and we're gonna talk about one of your conducting opportunities here in a sec. But so tell our viewers what does the assistant director actually do?
well, as you said, there is some conducting, especially as we find what our programming is and what we can, split a little bit. Now, these last two seasons, the holiday special is also kind of become my baby, which I love. So Eric and I mean, we collaborate on it and figure out what's the best combination of stuff. But that's just a fun program to do that I love doing. Yeah, so as the assistant director, there's a lot of communications then that I deal with, especially during the week. And Colin is a great help now as our artistic coordinator. That he takes care of some of those now, but then still sometimes it's just, especially Eric. As you know, after rehearsal we chat, and then okay. By the way, here's the next things we have to do. So there's a lot of that. I'm sure everybody probably remembers. I'm just walking around on stage chaotically sometimes before a concert because we're making sure everything's in place and all those kind of things. So yeah, it's definitely a wide variety, part of it's the same things you do anywhere as a choir director, and then especially some of it is more of that administrative side that and logistics, which I love also doing. And I know, Eric and you've talked with me many times, like, thank you that you like doing that because I just want to hand it off and I love doing it. So yeah.
Well, for what it's worth, your execution of your duties hasn't seemed chaotic at all to me. You
Good.
seem to be very organized, and you're shepherding, all our artists, making sure that they're in the right place at the right time, and all the chairs and stands are where they need to be. And you're a big part of making sure that our rehearsals and our performances go smoothly. So you're kind of an unsung hero behind the scenes, and I'll just publicly say here now, thank you, Phil, for all your great work.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Maybe it's just chaotic in my head, and then it comes out well. And
Okay.
that's what we do as a conductor sometimes, right?
It's true. We're always calming the chaos or preventing the chaos, but you're doing fantastic work. So let's
Thanks.
get to the music. So on this program, this all-American program, I've asked you to conduct Randall Thompson's piece, Testament of Freedom. Tell us about this piece. And you've got some experience conducting Thompson's works. In fact, was it just last season you conducted his Frostiana?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about Mr. Thompson, and then tell us a little bit about this piece and its genesis.
I love Thompson's stuff. It's not I think what I love about it so much is it's not that totally kind of American sound that we've talked about, like with Copeland. I mean, when you think about music history and all the open fifths and this broad, almost all we're going out to the West,
Yeah.
it really has that New England and just, kind of older American, I guess you could say, kind of feel to it. And like you mentioned with Frostiana, say the Testament of Freedom in many respects has some of that as well. It's the tunes are nice and lyric a lot of times. The text always comes out. I've always found that it's just great what he does with delivering and declamation of text, and just it's always great, easy to understand that stuff. And the way he orchestrates things too, he really understands what he needs to bring out with the orchestra, what is going to help to pull that text out, what's going to help broaden it, and also what would get in the way and what not to write. So,
Mhm.
thinking again with that artistic director job, the other thing a lot of for me is balance, being in that hall in rehearsals to figure out what can we do. And, some composers, it's an easier job than others for me, and Thompson is one of those that just it kind of seems to make sense, a lot. And I just, yeah, it just feels, I don't know, he just makes me feel American in a way that is still rooted with New England and tradition
Mhm.
from Europe, if that makes sense. So,
Mhm.
um, but I mean, great education here, finished at Harvard, taught at Harvard for a while. This Testament of Freedom was when he was at University of Virginia. And as we know, that was founded by Thomas Jefferson, and it was the 200th birthday of his birth, of Thomas Jefferson's birth, that was um, the beginnings for this piece. So, University of Virginia wanted to celebrate that, and Thompson was on faculty at that point.
Mhm.
Stephen Tuttle was the choir director at that point. So it was all right. We're going to make this great work. So as he's thinking about it, decided, okay, it's text that maybe Thomas Jefferson. That would be a good idea. It's the whole thing's about Thomas Jefferson. Let's look at
Yeah.
that. So he found three different sets of text. It's a movement work, but only sources of three texts. The first one was from the Summary View of the Rights of British America, which, as I was going through it first, I thought, okay, we're talking about America, but we're looking at the rights of British America, and what was the reason for that? But it's the text is sorry, I've got to just make sure I've got the right line here so I don't tell you the wrong text in the wrong movement. Uh, the God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. The hand of force may destroy, but cannot disjoin them.
Mm.
And it's just, it's very poignant, and I don't know, it kind of says, Jefferson's great at writing. It kind of says it all of it's us, it's our liberty,
Yeah.
it's our freedom,
Yeah.
and it wasn't given to us by a different nation, it wasn't given to us by a different person, but whatever our religious beliefs are, we're here under a higher power, I guess you could say, than just another person in some respects,
Mhm.
and I just I love that. And Thompson repeats this, quite a few times in this movement. And writing wise for this movement, and I'll kind of go through forms of a lot of stuff in a second, but it's just very stately. It's a lot of broad melodies, a lot of fanfares with the brass and woodwinds as well. So
Mhm.
you get that sense of openness, I think, of America as well, with the sweeping string lines, but you get these yada da dum bum da 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 dum, kind of
Yeah.
figures with brass and everything that just, I kind of just want to stand up right now and be like, yes, here we are, let's go. So it's a really interesting movement that definitely sets the tone for everything.
And Phil, let me just ask you a question. So is what about this opening? Bum
Oh yeah.
bum 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 bum. Tell us a little bit about that. The very first chords.
Yeah, so you've got five chords, and if you think about Thomas Jefferson, there are five syllables. So yeah, I saw this everywhere. What I tried to find out is if there was any inkling anywhere where Randall Thompson actually said that's what I meant to do. I don't know if that's what he meant to do, but Thomas Jefferson, it
Yeah,
works, you
it
know.
does work.
And
It does work.
yeah, at any time, anybody talks about this piece, they always say that. Thank you for reminding me for that. So, yeah, it's just kind of there it is. So, and that also makes you kind of want to stand up like, oh, Jefferson, okay, what are we talking about? Um, but and I guess to think about that too in patriotism, so it was for Virginia's Glee Club. There were 40 members at that time in that group. So if you can think, just a few more than what we're going to have, actually, I mean, kind of the
And
same kind of size.
40 men, right? This was the men's.
40 men.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. University of Virginia, in 1943. So yeah, a male group. And actually, Thompson writes at one point about this, that during the semester, because of course we're in the middle of World War II at this time.
Right.
So during the semester, numbers kept dwindling and dwindling. And, he says there was one rehearsal where there were only 12 men, and a few of those were there only to say goodbye.
Oh,
So, you can think for a composer, I mean, Randall Thompson, and here he is, pouring his heart out in this piece, and it's going to be how many people are finally going to sing? Do I need to
um,
make this into a solo four movement piece? I mean, but
so they're losing all these guys to the war effort.
yeah, but miraculously, so in his little, and I think this will be in the program note as well. He actually says, but miraculously, performance came and all 40 men were there. So I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but the miracle was there.
All right, it was meant to be.
That's right. And Randall Thompson played, it was originally just with piano. So he played that. And then he pretty quickly scored it for orchestra. The first orchestra performance then was in 45 with the Boston Symphony Orchestra under Sergei Kosovitsky,
Yeah.
who, if those of you that know Boston and Tanglewood, he was director with Tanglewood. Well,
Right.
back in 40, Kuzovitsky had commissioned Thompson to write a piece for Tanglewood, and that's the famous Alleluia that he wrote.
Oh, nice. Right. Which we
Yeah.
have performed, and one of the most performed and much loved choral works.
So, and of course, it was supposed to be a fanfare, but then it's this solemn thing on Alleluia. So
Yes.
apparently, it was still good enough that Kuzovitsky said, "Okay, let's do the Testament of Freedom 5 years later with Boston Symphony." So good that there were no grudges, and then he got his fanfare.
Well, and as my understanding is that Kusevetsky and Boston performed this shortly after FDR's death, and that this was
Yes.
a tribute to FDR.
Yes. And Boston originally said, well, we just should cancel the concert. And he said, no, we need to do a concert. Let's make, and I'm not sure then he said we need different repertoire or not, but we're doing a concert and it needs to be free to the public
Mm,
and it needs to be a dedication to Roosevelt. Yeah. So, great ties, with all that.
right.
And again, kind of, I guess that's when I talk about kind of America and those, deep roots and
Yes.
European tradition, too. It's our American tradition, but it's not the same American openness that we think of with Copeland and the Wild West and all that.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so, but yeah, so the whole piece then four movements. That first one, a lot of strings, a lot of kind of open. I mean, it's thick writing, but open, a lot of homogeneous text from the choir, a lot of unison every once in a while too. So we really get, that God who gave us liberty and justice, is the one
Unified voice. Yeah.
core. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. So then the second and two movements, very drastically different, I feel, in a lot of ways, and they come and they go together. Both of those texts then are from Jefferson's Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms.
Ooh, now that's a mouthful. What's that all about?
I know, right? So this went to the Second Continental Congress, July 6th of 1775. John Dickinson revised it as it got sent in, but basically it was a declaration that was explaining why these 13 colonies that we had needed to take up arms, and it was why the American Revolution began. There was discussions about the Boston Tea Party,
Mhm.
taxation, all of that was in there. It was an interesting, I mean, it's obviously very long. And even the text for these two are much longer. You're not going to get repeats. So read the text in your program before the piece starts. But the big points in especially the third movement: honor, justice,
Mhm.
humanity, freedom, how
Yeah.
we must fight for our freedom, and not just for us, but there's a lot of talk about it's fighting for not just us, but our children and the next generations of our people and our government.
Mhm.
Um, and this is one that I always remember kind of hearing from different people. Our cause is just, our
Yeah.
union is perfect,
Yeah.
and our internal resources are great.
Wow, very powerful statements, and timely too, as we're approaching the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It's really good to go back and revisit some of these texts and writings by one of the founding fathers in Thomas Jefferson, including from this Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms. But defending freedom, defending liberty, and really rallying the colonists and the Americans at the time to stand up and fight for those causes.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially now with, it's, I mean, again, with us too and our 250th, and I think, obviously we don't want to get political here, but, just what America can helps with the world, of helping for freedom for not generations just of Americans too, but just the freedom of the world. Yeah, it's so poignant and wonderful. And the third movement then ties in with that, where here now he's really talking, we fight not for glory, we don't fight for conquest, but we
Mm,
fight for the defense of the freedom that is our birthright.
hmm. Cool.
Oh, again, but compositionally with these two movements, very different. The
Mhm.
second one, very solemn, and I think partially it's because of this. It's more part of the writings in the first one are more of that reflection in him of why do we have to pick up this gun? Why
Mhm.
is it that we have to go to war? And so there's a lot of reflection, solemn. It starts off softly, strings and like low bassoons and low brass, just like
Mhm.
boom, boom. That's not considered a
Kind of a
march. That's
kind of a dirge, huh?
surge. Yeah, yeah. But it does pick up, and we get some fanfares later. But yeah, it's more of this kind of reflection. There's a lot of mixed meter. So as conductors, okay, where are we going now with our
Right.
arms? But it's because of all this text, and to make sure that the text is delivered with the right, syllabic structure, all of that kind of thing. So it's great writing in that respect too, and I think and it comes across well. And then that third movement is a march.
Mm.
You know,
Oh, cool.
when we've picked it up now, we've got our guns, and we've got to go do this. Yet it still starts very slowly compared to a normal march, and by the end, I mean it's I think the full score is about 40-45 pages just of kind of a continual cello throughout of just building and building. So
Yeah.
again, it's like, okay, okay, we're gonna make this. Yep, here we go, and it just gets faster and faster. So very realistic in that respect. And then great big fanfares by the end of that. And then that fourth movement um, starts, and this might just be in my head, it might be the chaos, I don't know, but it almost is reminiscent to me of the Barber Adagio for strings.
Really?
It's just strings that start. It's mainly, violins, cellos in their
Yeah.
upper ranges, and the melody from the first movement, the dum ba da 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 dum, that it's just a beautiful melody, but it's intertwined between the two violin sections. So
Hmm.
you'll get a measure from the first, and they're constantly playing, but you almost have to. Well, I hope I can make this happen in 2 weeks, but you almost have to see the score instead of just hear it to actually hear the melody, completely without hearing the other parts. But it really, it's again kind of somber, reflective, and the first few times I listened to it, I thought, wow, I wonder if he, had heard Adagio for strings by that point when he
Well,
wrote, when he wrote that
yeah,
orchestration.
that's interesting. But a different character for that fourth movement, but the text is different. It comes from a different source, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's a letter, and it's much later. It's a letter to John Adams from Jefferson's home in Monticello in 1821. So this is the end of his life, and it starts with, "I shall not die without a hope that light and liberty are on steady advance."
Wow. Yeah.
So it's talking about, the world, and there's discussion, there's talk with, Europe and what we've done here in the US, and how, the freedom that we have is known throughout, the world, and remarks about 1776 and all of that as well. Yeah, and again, it starts to pick up, I mean, the opening has that kind of openness. There's an oboe that starts our little da 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 bum little fanfares. Then we get some horns, so more again somber kind of reflections of fanfares. But then
Mm.
of course, here come the brass, here come percussion and timpani and everything, and then it's okay, boom, and then we go back to the original text from movement one to
Ah,
end movement four. The God who gave us life gave us
yep.
liberty at the same time, and the hand of force may destroy but cannot disjoin them. And
Wow.
then at the very end, all we have are just big, awesome chords of life that go for 5, 6 measures with orchestra, booming and going away, and then liberty, and then combining life and liberty in different voices, and just, and then of course you've got to have the big timpani and drum rolls at the end,
Of
and
course.
hey. So it's just an amazing, amazing piece. Definitely very patriotic, right in time for as we start next season with the beginning of our 250th, anniversaries as well. And and even though so much of the text is about American Revolutionary War. This is happening in World War II. It was never meant as a political piece either. But, you know, CBS recorded the first one, and the US realized this is patriotic, this could help. And so it was quickly broadcast, nationwide on CBS. Back in 43, and then also the United States Office of War Information, then also had it transmitted by shortwave radio way back
Whoa.
to all the Allied servicemen stationed in Europe during World War II.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
So again, yeah, just it's a yeah, it's a piece for our time, for the 1770s,
For
for
all time. Yeah,
every
sounds
war,
like.
and yeah, for hopefully the rest of, as hopefully our whole world finds peace. It's still poignant for that too, to remind us then of what we've had to go through to make that. So
Yeah. Wow.
I'm really excited. I think the audience is going to love it. Yeah, huge orchestra, like everything on this piece, and of course, our wonderful singers who always kick it out of the park. So yeah, very excited, very excited.
Well, I'm excited too, Phil. I'm glad that I asked you to conduct this. I'm glad that we're going to perform it, and thank you for reminding us of what a big impact this piece had back in the 1940s. That it was broadcast so widely. So it just tells you how important it is, and I'm glad that we're able to take it up and give our first performance of it. I would be really curious to know if it's ever been performed in Tucson before. Maybe it has, but it's not in the last 21 years, I can tell you that. So I think this is a piece not to be missed. We encourage all of you to come hear it, hear this all-American program of Copeland and Thompson and Blitzstein and some other surprises that we have in store for you, as we look forward to America's 250th. But we're still celebrating Tucson's 250th this year. Our gratitude to all who have served um, us and our country via our local Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, which celebrates its 100th anniversary this year. So it's a really exciting and important time. So please join us coming soon here, February 28th in Green Valley, March 1st and 2nd in Tucson for this All-American program. And again, Phil, thank you so much for being our assistant director and for leading this exciting piece of Randall Thompson's and for just being you, Phil.
Well, thanks, Eric. I look forward to 10 more days where we get to work together and get a little warmer. So thanks,
Indeed.
everybody. Yeah, have a great time, and we can't wait to see you in March.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care.